For those of you that are new, or if you don't know me, I'm Dr. Claire Muselman. I love all things human behavior. So this is kind of where my forte comes into this. I really like making good people leaders, and I really like making sure that people understand that you have the ability to change your life at any point. You just have to have the mindset to be able and willing to do it. I also like to be really vivacious and very bright and bold. And so therefore have been very glitter and sparkles throughout my life. My home for the past 20 years has been in workers' compensation. And so that is where it has been. And now I am transitioning into higher ed. And so I really like the idea of being able to teach people everything that we've learned from our failures and our mishaps to make sure you can make a better life for yourself. So today, self-awareness. Okay, caveat. Once you know, you can't unknow. And I say that because it's a superpower. We talked about this during the last masterclass, that being aware and being able to cultivate a lot of knowledge around this is its superpower within itself. Because what happens is once you are able to be aware of this, you start to not only see it within yourself, but you are able to see it within others. And again, once you know, you can't unknow what we're going to go down on this journey. So it is a superpower. And once you know, you know. So today we're really diving into our own reflections and what is going to come next. So with that, we left off on reframing views and some things that we were going to consider. We had done an assessment on what is your viewpoint, and we did an assessment on kind of like, where are you showing up on, are you good at regulating yourself? Are you more of a glass half full, half empty, and kind of went through that. We also talked about failure and why failure is so hard for us to just take. So we were looking at redefining what failure is, looking at more as a first attempt at learning, or okay, it didn't work like that. I'm not a huge fan of the term resilience. I'm more a fan of the term endurance. It bothers me a lot when people say, oh, children are so resilient based on whatever their upbringing is. No, people get scarred, people get traumas, people get walls, or you wouldn't be here right now trying to figure out your own self-awareness or whatnot. So I think it's a better lens for us to look at that we are really good at endurance, and how do we build our endurance and then take what we have used and learned in life and shift that into something that can be more on that success mindset frame. So we talked about learning from failure. We talked about failure as stepping stones and finding opportunities in avenues. You have two options in life. You can let life happen to you, or you can start to become the protagonist to your own life. And this is kind of where a lot of this reframing, where you might be like, well, Claire, you're full of shit. I don't really like this, or, that's not going to work for me. You could be absolutely correct. My goal is to give you everything that I have learned up to this point and everything that I have studied, and for you to take away what is going to be what's best for you. Take what works for you, leave what doesn't. And this is where you kind of cultivate this in your own sense of self-purpose, self-awareness, whatever that's going to look like. With that, we talked a lot about using negative feedback to your advantage. And if sometimes people are giving you feedback, whether it be a colleague, a spouse, your boss, and you get that like, ugh, and you feel it within your body, that there might be a reason for that. And so we'll get more into like that energy and stuff like that later on this year. But for now, just things that we want to think about and really looking beyond yourself and then persisting. Again, if resilience is a word that works for you, that's great. I prefer persistence and endurance. And so with that, we're going to dive into today. All right, your homework. And if you were not here or you did not do it, guess what? You've got time while I'm talking right now. All right, so the stress test. I wanted to know where you guys were seated. How stressed are you? And we're going to dive into why this ends up playing a bigger part into life. And then also the questions that I had asked last time. And again, if you did not attend, you can go to the Bloom Vault and go review this. There's a lot of questions that we went through that are really helpful to just, if you don't know where to start, or you're kind of just like, I don't know what's going on, it's a good way to just start with like a step one. So you do not have to have taken this stuff to be able to be here today, but it is something I want you guys to get the most out of your time that you're spending with me. And so, yes, there is some homework for some self-reflection. So, and then the questions that we had asked earlier in that masterclass, wanted to make sure you went back and revisited those. You will get homework again today. And how well you feel like this resonates with you is going to be about how much you feel like spending some time with yourself. So the relationship to cultivate with yourself is the most important one that you're going to have. It's the longest one you're going to have in your life. And I want you guys to understand what's going on in your mindset, because that is where you live a lot of the time. So hopefully you did do your homework. If you did not, please feel free to go ahead and do it now. And again, so we're looking at HTTPS /2 and that beautiful www.BeMindfulOnline.com/test-your-stress. Let's see what you guys have. And if you already took it or you are taking it now, if you want to be honest and hold yourself accountable, go ahead and throw what you scored in the chat. And you can do it privately to me, or if you want to be bold and, put it out there for everyone, go for it. We are here to support one another. This should be a psychologically safe space for you to grow. Okay. Your homework for this class is going to be, sorry, it says this class is, I'm going to give you more reflection questions this time, but they're going to be very different. And I want you to spend time. You can put yourself on a timer or pick a few. I think I'm going to ask you to do 20 of them over the next month to just get into a pattern of starting to give yourself 5 minutes a day. Could be less than that. Maybe you give yourself 2 minutes a day to just stream from your mind with a prompt. And when you're doing this, the actual art of writing accesses a different part of your brain than if we're having this as a conversation. If you want bonus homework, go have coffee with someone and talk about it. Tell a friend, a colleague. If you want to do a coffee chat with me, I'm here for it. I am here always to listen, to help, to understand. Go down this road. Would love that. So know that that is always an option with you guys as well. Okay, so some things that we're going to think about as we go into this. So we were looking at mindset pretty heavily last class of where are you at with that mindset. So some of the lessons that I want you guys to think about as we dive into today as to where do we end up with like a dysfunctional mindset? What does it look like and how is it disguised? Because a lot of times it's in ways that we have not necessarily thought of before. So challenges are here to help us grow. It's a challenge because we don't easily know how to navigate it in that moment. And sometimes we have responses that create this victim-y type mentality where it's like, oh, this is hard. But these are opportunities for you to figure out a new way of doing something or an opportunity to grow. I have been a very reactive person in my 20s, my 30s, not so much. I'm a little bit more reflective before I make a decision about something being challenging or negative. Like, wait, hold on. What is this trying to teach me? I have a mentor. His name is Mark Pugh. He's big in the workers' compensation space. And I had kind of like a crazy year last year. I think it's probably the best way to put it. And when we were doing a mentoring session, he flat out would tell me, all right, so what is this teaching you? And I would say, all right, well, this is what happened. And, and then this happened. He's like, what is that teaching you? And so we went through this. And in 55 minutes, he asked me 14 times, what is this teaching you? Because you can always find the opportunity or a lesson that is going to find a way to benefit you from that. And a lot of times when you feel like your life is falling apart, there are a lot of things that are actually falling together for you. You don't see it in the moment. And that's where we have to look at challenges, that they're disguised. Challenges are disguised opportunities. And so you might not be able to see it because you're in it, but there's always people around you that can help pull you out to that 20,000 foot view that are going to help you figure out what is this best opportunity area for you to grow. And we are all very, very different. And our differences are gifts. It's why nobody can be you. You are your own you. You are the most unique version of you that you can be. So own that. Our differences are our gifts. I'm a professor at Drake University, and I was meeting with our dean 2 weeks ago. And he said, you being politically correct and staying within the lines does no one any good. If you are not going to be the most authentic version of you, what are you doing for our students? And that hit me really hard because I feel like I show up pretty authentic, but to be called out is a little bit where I'm like, oh, we need more. Okay, we'll figure that out. But I like welcoming that feedback because those differences that we have and those life experiences that we have that have been very specific to our journey are what we can learn from each other. So then it's going back to the mirror and looking and saying, okay, what does that look like? Where am I not being my most authentic self? And I'm pretty politically correct when I'm teaching because, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the world of education right now. So things that I have to now go back and look at and say, okay, how do I push the needle forward and do it in a way that's going to be respectful and help others? So then when we make mistakes, again, looking at them as learning opportunities. And one of the best things that I heard from one of my mentors this week, Ron Carter, he is the CEO of RX Bridge. He said, if you live your day to the best of your abilities, great, be done with it, because the universe is going to open up and tomorrow will be a completely different day. And if you did your best today, you don't need to know what tomorrow holds. So I think about it from this, when we try our best, we always succeed, even if we don't get the results that we hoped for, because sometimes there's things that are better in store for us than we could have ever even imagined. And the only way that we fail is if we refuse to learn. Because again, there are opportunities, challenges are disguised as these opportunities. And if you don't want to look at it that way, then that is the only way that you're really failing in life. So things to think about. Okay, so let's look at some examples on our mindset and thinking and what we kind of were aware of last time. I know a lot of you guys scored very, very highly with a lot of this. And there were some of us that have opportunities. If we're honest with ourselves, we all have opportunity areas. So let's dive into, there's 11 things that we're going to discuss. Now, why do we end up having these like crazy mindsets, and what's going on with that? Well, there's some roadblocks that we end up throwing up kind of as defense mechanisms, or if you want to call it, is just how we learn to survive in that moment. We are innately wired to survive. And so whether that ends up being more from a physiological standpoint, an emotional standpoint, there's a lot of things that come into play. And so we end up throwing a lot of roadblocks up. So as we go through this, I want you to think about, what are some of the roadblocks that you throw up in your own life? So let's talk through these real quick. Some of the roadblocks. We like to control things. Guess what? That is a simple human behavior. It is biology. We need to control the narrative into what is going on when things feel like they're out of control. There's any type of chaos. We like to know that our brain has a narrative to tell itself to get us from point A to point B. And when there is an absence of fact in any capacity, the brain's going to tell itself a story to be able to draw a conclusion. And a way you can think about this is, Melly, I know you're on here. So I text Melly and I don't hear back from her. I text her again because maybe she didn't see my text and I don't hear back from her. And then I call her and I don't hear back. And I'm going to now be like, okay, what was my last interaction with Melly? Is she upset with me? Did I do something? And I'm going to now create a narrative as to why Melly is not calling me back. Well, guess what? Melly might be over in Italy, not wanting to be on her phone because she's traveling, having a great time in life, and just doesn't choose to answer her phone. It might have nothing to do with me. But the way that our mind works, one, it's always about us. It's never about other people. So we have to think about that. And two, how do you get to that conclusion? What are the facts that actually tell you that that's what's going on? Kind of something crazy to think about, but it is a human survival mechanism. We have to control our narrative. It's not always right. So when we talk about, you could be right, or that is a possibility, absolutely. This is where we just want to control a situation because we don't necessarily have all the facts. So that's something we want to think about. That can be a roadblock throughout this. Another roadblock. Guess what, guys? We are judgy. And you know who we're the judgiest to? So this is all about the mirror. So when you look in the mirror in the morning, what do you see? How do you talk to yourself? How do you show up for yourself? Do you say great things to yourself in the mirror? Like you are going to go have an amazing masterclass today, Claire. Or when you're brushing your teeth, are you giving yourself some attaboys on your physical appearance, maybe an achievement you've had this week, anything that is good about your life? How do you talk to yourself? Because we tend to judge. And instead of saying like, you're going to be awesome today, you look amazing, we think, oh, I don't know if I should wear that color, or do I not feel really great about this? And we're going to talk about this a little bit later because this ends up being a huge thing from a perception standpoint. But we judge. And then when we actually have our own insecurities, we start to judge other people. And the way that we judge other people is, guess what, guys? Here comes that mirror right back at us. We judge other people's parenting because we feel inadequate with an area of our own life. And it might not be in your conscious mind. Some of these things might actually be in your unconscious or subconscious where you aren't readily noticing that. But think about it. When you judge other people, take a mirror approach to that. What is it actually saying about you? And this doesn't have to be something that is vocalized to another person or in a text or in an email or anything like that. When you have those thoughts, judging the appearance of a house, animal, people, whatever that might look like, what are you really saying about yourself? Things to think about. And this is where we start to get into the hard truth. This isn't a masterclass series that's designed to be like, oh, we're all unicorns and rainbows and fluffy yay. There's a lot of shit that we have that we actually have to own. And that's where the beauty and the superpower comes in this, is understanding where that comes from. So things to think about. This ends up being a huge roadblock. And I caution you and I ask you for some self-awareness on this. There's a big rule that we have in my house specifically. My daughter is now almost 15, but when she was younger, we don't talk illy of women in my house at all. Because in this world, women are designed to be pitted against each other. Well, I won't have that. So even when they were young, and they would say, Sarah's being mean or whatever they would say, I'd be like, we don't say things about other women in our house. We don't do that. You find a way to figure it out, work it out, and you move on, but we don't speak illy, because those are the things that we start to innately do throughout life. And then you become an adult and you're in a corporate setting or you're in a nonprofit setting and you're working with other people, and you've got these belief systems that have been built in where it ends up being very judgy and it's all about our own stuff. And so I say this because these are the things that if you start to really peel back that onion and figure out, why is this a roadblock? What is happening from this? A lot of it stemmed from us as children, ways that we were raised, or the ways that we've seen behavioral patterns modeled for us. And this ends up being something that actually blocks us. And so I want to tear that down for you guys too. All right, next roadblock. We ignore things. Oh goodness. If anyone's ever put off going to the dentist, going to the doctor, taking care of yourself, hello, we like to ignore things. This can be a huge thing for us. So this is why cultivating self-awareness is so important. So I'm going to give you questions that I want you to take away and spend 5 minutes on after this class. Don't ignore things. Like if I asked you, what do you want most in life right now? How would you answer that? A lot of people don't take the time to figure out what they want, what makes them the most happy, and really figuring things out, because we go on autopilot for life. Well, I'm asking you to stop ignoring things and really take some time to focus on, what do you want your life to be like? How do you want to show up for this world? How do you want to feel every day that you're alive? What does that look like for you? And stop ignoring the things that really, truly make you happy and set your soul on fire. Another roadblock, we like to blame. Guess what? Every time you point one finger out, there are 4 coming back at you. So think about that for a second. When we look at circumstances, a lot of them are based upon our choices. People talk about the karmic circle. It's not always about putting out good or bad and you get good or bad back. What the karmic circle is you make a choice or a decision, and there is a consequence to that choice. It can be positive, it can be negative. But how much do you actually take self-responsibility and self-accountability for things instead of blaming other people, family, circumstances, etc.? A lot of us have crazy pasts. We've had a lot of crazy things happen to us in life that keep our experiences and our differences so unique. But this is where it's like, all right, at what point do you actually take some control of your own life, take that accountability, quit blaming others, and become the protagonist of your own life? Everybody's got circumstances. Everybody's got problems. Everyone's got issues. It's what you do with them that ends up becoming your superpower. So a roadblock, big one that we see, blaming. All right, next up, there's also patronizing. This can also be a pretty big roadblock in our lives. And so cultivating some awareness behind this ends up being a pretty big superpower. Are you a contributor? And if you see this, what does that look like for you? And how do you remedy it in your life? Big time in the workspace. And also, what does that look like in your friend circles, in your family life? A lot of times we go back to like that ignoring and that blaming and whatnot. Well, patronizing falls right in there too. So again, this is just more of like an awareness that I want you to start to pay attention to over this next month. What do these roadblocks look like for you in life? And how can you continue to remedy these to move forward and enhance your life? Do we ask enough why questions? Sometimes we do this in a patronizing manner. So a lot of these can be connected together. someone's going to go do something differently, and we can't seem to comprehend, well, why would you do that way? Maybe somebody's going to make a career choice after 10, 15 years, leave something, do something differently. And we're like, well, why would you do that? Okay, hold the phone for a second. What does that mean for you? Why is that a roadblock? Let's think about that for a second. When we see people do different scary things, sometimes that makes us shake ourselves to our core. Well, if they're doing that, does that mean that I should be doing that? Okay, if you get a feeling about things like that, maybe it's time to take a look back again at ourselves and think, all right, is it time that I shake up my own life? Where am I unhappy? Where am I finding my joy? How am I spending my time? Things to think about. So when we are asking people questions, we'll talk about nonverbals here in a few minutes too. Pay attention to your tone, your demeanor. Are you seeking to understand, or is it actually like a roadblock because this has something to do with you and you need to mirror on that instead of actually like pushing that out onto someone else? And the last roadblock, we tend to give lots of advice. God, I'm doing it right now. So I do go back and rewatch these, just so you know, and I do like to take notes off of myself. I think it's a pretty fun thing to go back and be like, okay, what did I say? Did I agree with that, etc. Kind of like go back and reading through your notes. So if you did do the work last time, read through that again. What advice were you giving yourself? So we like to give other people advice. Do we take our own? Think about this in the parenting landscape quite a bit. Okay, do as I say, not as I do. Or, hey, I've done this. I'm a human being. I've made some terrible mistakes. This is why I'm telling you this, so you don't make the same. But when we choose to give advice, take a mirror approach to that as well. Would we be willing to take our own? Things to think about. This can be a roadblock. All right. So last time we did an assessment that looked at our value systems, our belief systems, and the assumptions that we make. It gave you an idea of where we were sitting, kind of how do we think? How are we innately come into the table with, I ask you glass half full, half empty, you come back with yes or no, you pick that out. And we did a replication of this for a few questions for you to be able to build an awareness to where you are in that moment. So a lot of our life problems stem from dysfunctional thinking. And so this is where we want to take a look at psychology, and we're going to put this in. There are 11 categories of dysfunctional thinking, and this is where we want to start looking at, okay, we all have an opportunity to improve wherever we're at, starting right here. So let's talk about what that looks like. Take what works for you and leave what doesn't, because not all of these are going to apply to you, and I'm aware of that. But I want to make sure that we cover as much as possible so that you're aware when you see this. Also, friends, family, colleagues, we are cultivating an awareness that's like, oh, hey, I know what that is. Okay. And you start to see this differently. All right. The first one, extreme thinking. This is where we learn in life very, very easily. And I will go and use a parenting example of this because this happened yesterday. You always say that, Mom. We don't always do anything. There aren't these extreme viewpoints. We tend to see things very, if it works in our favor, we look at things in a very black or white manner when we know there's a big spectrum out there on that. So if we are not 100% perfect at something, we're like, oh, do I even submit it? Oh, do I hit send? Oh, I don't know if I'm ready yet. We use these extreme polarizing viewpoints, and that can end up being a very big dysfunctional way of thinking. This is where you look at, you know what? Great is the enemy of good. Sometimes you just want to get things done, and that's okay. Life doesn't have to be perfect. You're not always going to do something, or you never do something. I used to do bodybuilding back when I was in high school, and I remember thinking of cheat days, the cheat food days, which now that I look back on this, there's a lot of things that I would have done differently. A lot of psychology into this now too. But one of the things that one of my nutritionalists had said is, all right, so you have a bad meal. Okay, that doesn't ruin your day. It just means it's done, it's over, and now you move on to the next, and you try and you do your best at that point. And I think that's a good way of thinking about things. We tend to be like, oh, all right, I had terrible meal for breakfast. The day is shot. Oh my goodness. And then we're done. And then we just spiral sometimes and continue down this bad rabbit hole instead of just acknowledging what it is. Okay, did that. I'm agreeing with it. It's okay. That happened. All right, now I'm going to be better after that. And understanding that it's okay to be human instead of everything always being very polarizing. you're not a complete failure because something doesn't go flawlessly. This is kind of the nice law of large numbers in life. But extreme thinking can be a very, very, very big dysfunctional way of thinking. All right. Overgeneralization. This is where we generalize a specific failure or negative result as an endless pattern. Okay, again, kind of going back to that extreme thinking, overgeneralization ends up being that very much as well. So again, just because it's a one-off or there's a specific moment in time that doesn't go great, that doesn't negate everything that you've worked for up to that point. So again, taking things for exactly what they are in that moment, in a specific point in time, and then letting the things go that come along with it. It's okay to feel emotion in a moment and feel it, because the more that you're able to feel an emotion when we have a failure or a negative result, the easier it is to move on from it. But you've got to give yourself the grace and know that this doesn't mean this is your whole life. This is a specific moment in time. Feel it, let it go, and move on. Then we look at mental filtering. And again, all of these are dysfunctional ways of thinking. So they're not going to be the most positive, but they're easy enough to dive into. And hopefully you're able to start thinking of some that are applicable to your own life. So this is where we emphasize one single negative detail, and it starts distorting all aspects of somebody else's perception of reality. Okay, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to say to like my text to Melly, Melly's not responding. Okay, I don't get a response from Melly, and this can end up being a big dysfunctional thinking way of hijacking. And then I'm like, well, maybe I'm just a terrible friend. Well, nobody likes me. I don't have any friends. And you start to go down this where it's going to distort your perception of reality. Now, remember, this is kind of being that victim of your life versus the protagonist of your story. Because again, Melly's not responding because she's over in Italy, living her best life, doing her thing, not being on her phone. Versus I'm trying to figure out why she's not responding to me. My life is over. So when we do this mental filtering, then we tend to overgeneralize, and we use that crazy amount of thinking where it's not helpful. Remember, these are single details and it's just one thing. So when we look at, all right, how do you build endurance around this? It's understanding this is one specific pinpointed moment in time. And what does your mental filter look like? Are you able to piece these out? Or does this end up becoming an emotional hijacking amount where you're done and your productivity is gone for the day? So start thinking about this. Sometimes we disqualify the positive, and I guarantee you can all think of someone who does this. It does not matter if it is the perfect, most beautiful day outside. This person will find something wrong with the weather, the temperature, you name it. We all know these people. We know them. Sometimes we've been them, let's be honest. But we mentally disqualify positive experiences from having any relevance or importance. So you will always seek to find the negative. Well, all right, if you're going to do that, guess what? Like attracts like. So if you want to look for all those negative experiences, guess what? You're going to see a lot more. Red car theory comes into this. So we know who these people are. This can be a very dysfunctional way of thinking. This one's kind of a no-brainer. And again, sometimes we go to these family events, especially when the holidays come, and there's always that one family member. You're like, I don't want to be sad. I don't want to sit next to Uncle Joe. I don't want to sit next to Uncle Joe. I can like feel the energy. We know who these people are. We need to not be these people because they're, again, this is looking at opportunities in the face of negativity or in the face of failure and trying to find ways that we can start to be more endurance building around this. The fifth way, mind reading. This is where we draw negative conclusions regarding situations despite a lack of concrete evidence to support these conclusions. All right, here we go. It's annual review time. You have done 99 things amazing this year. And boom, here comes the one thing that you are asked to work on. Guess what? You only hear that one improvement recommendation, no matter how great you have been all year. This ends up being that thing and you're like, oh, just had a terrible review. No, you had an amazing review, but this is the way that sometimes our dysfunctional thinking will show up. And then we end up drawing a negative conclusion as a result of what has transpired when in the entirety, and you pull out your emotion and your ego and you start looking at it from a logical stance, that's not what happened. But again, actually, if you want to do the math on this, we've talked about the emotional bank account. Well, this also comes into play. For every 20 positive affirmations equals one negative encounter. So it takes a lot to build up emotional bank accounts. And so when we're trying to give feedback, or we're trying to give people actual constructive feedback, you got to think about in terms of this. Like, being direct with people is really helpful, because you aren't sugarcoating and you aren't trying to sandwich the here's the positive, here's the actual feedback, here's the positive. Just being upfront with people and direct can be a very big superpower within itself. The other thing to be aware of, though, is not always remembering that it's a negative outcome. It's not necessarily a negative outcome. Sometimes people are going to give you feedback and it doesn't feel great because there's a truth behind it. It doesn't mean that you're a terrible person. It doesn't mean that you have a bad life. It's one specific instance. And you take that and you move on from it. One of the things that I think I've realized a lot lately is when people talk about being innovative, we do a lot in life that beats innovation out of people. And so when people are like, hey, you've got to have this great, amazing growth abundance mindset, it's very hard for some of us to have that, because we've been hardwired to be politically correct and don't say this and do this and show up as your authentic self, but don't be too authentic, and be attractive, but don't be too attractive, and be smart, but don't be too smart. And there's all of these things that end up coming into this. And so it can be overwhelming. So this is where, when we start looking at this, like really trying to take an evaluation standpoint from an objectivity point of view versus that subjectivity where you're feeling like, oh, all right, that one thing from my performance review, this was a terrible review. No. And one bad instance doesn't mean you have a bad life. Again, thinking about this. So again, mind reading as a dysfunctional way of thinking. Aha, fortune telling. Again, still staying on this dysfunctional mindset. Sometimes we will arbitrarily predict that things will turn out poorly. Come on, guys, we can't do that. We got to set the stage. Do we want a positive outcome? Well, guess what? The best way to try and get a positive outcome is to go into it with a positive mindset. This can be challenging in certain situations. I know that, you know that. So then what do you do to prepare yourself to be in the best mental headspace for around this? And this is where we look at, okay, what if we started to think that everything would go right, or things would go better than we expected? What does life look like for that? And this, again, I know this is a challenging one. We are, especially if you are in the risk management insurance space, we are hardwired to look for the most unfortunate outcomes so that we can plan accordingly and then try and remedy it. So think about that from your own life, right? What would be the best opportunity? What's the best thing that could happen today? And if you start to frame things in that mentality, you'll start to see that you show up for yourself a lot better than you did previously. So tomorrow morning, I want you to ask yourself, what is the best thing that could happen for you today? What is the best outcome that I could hope for today? And then start going in and charging after your life in that, because guess what? Your life depends on it. All right, magnifying and minimizing. Exaggerating the importance of negative factors and minimizing the importance of positive factors. Again, kind of similar to some of the other ones that we've talked about, but we do this. We magnify like, oh, this was such a horrible experience and then we minimize those positive aspects. And so this is where, again, we got to sometimes just step back. The ego is an incredible, it's supposed to be here to help, but sometimes we just have to put it in check every once in a while. And remember, we don't know everything. We're constantly learning. We're constantly growing. But to do yourself the best favor, don't exaggerate the importance of negative factors. All right, stuff happens, and minimize those downplays. This is where looking at what 3 great things happened to you today. This also can help with that, because there's always some good in every day, but we tend to magnify what didn't go so great and minimize those wins. Well, it's time to start flipping it. Let's start magnifying those awesome wins and minimizing the stuff that didn't go so well, and then changing it into an opportunity. Again, trying to look more in an abundance mindset. Number 8, emotional reasoning. Okay, emotions. They are just a feeling that are going to be assimilated to a situation. They come and go. It's okay. They're like waves. You let them come, you feel them, you move on. They do not last forever, and it is okay to have them. Sometimes it's okay to not be okay. And being able to give yourself some space to just feel what you feel and then let things go and move on is a really, really, really good opportunity for you to actually release. So when we look at emotional reasoning, it can be a very dysfunctional because we tend to not pay attention to the objectivity of facts and data that surround whatever we're making a decision on or we're looking at from our life view. And so when we interpret our own reality based on these emotions, it's not necessarily true. But remember, you spend a lot of time in here, and that's not necessarily factual based. It's not necessarily logical. It's just what happens because it's what we do. So this is where journaling can be really helpful. Get it out on paper. You don't necessarily need it in here. Get it out. The act of writing can be very therapeutic and helpful. And you might be like, yeah, that's not for me. All right, voice memo yourself. Send yourself a text, send yourself an email, do something else, get it out of your head. Because one of the things that I've liked to do with people is you have a situation. Okay, you're unhappy about the situation. Write the situation out. Just write it out as you see it from your lens. Then I want you to go back and I want you to cross out everything that you can't factually prove, because that's all your emotion talking. And then you go back and read it again. What's the situation look like for you now? So now you've had time to process it. You've written it out. You've gone back and crossed out everything you can't factually prove. And then you are left with the actual scenario. Try that out. See if that works for you. If you're ever in one of those situations, it can be really helpful to help process the emotions that are surrounding the event and help you kind of kick yourself back into a logical space of how to handle it. Really helpful if you're a leader, you are not in a great headspace to go walk in and deal with some people. Really good way to just kind of get it out and be like, okay, what do I know to be true? What can I factually prove? And then move forward with that. All right, use of should statements. Number 9, should, shouldn't, ought, must, ugh. Okay. Manipulating yourself to take action isn't necessarily a healthy opportunity. It's not. This is where we do, like, this is where we start to like take some of that. Like, I should go for a walk today. I should work out today. All right, you're trying to coerce yourself into doing things. Okay, there's what you do and there's what you don't do. Okay, shoulds are great, but nobody cares. Do it. There's things that you do, there's things that you don't. You know what you should be doing in life. We all do. There's always these areas of opportunity where we know, well, I could have done that better. I ought to do it that way. And we don't. And so this is a way of dysfunctional thinking. Stop hijacking yourself. This is where we get into that logical components of, all right, we got to make a plan, and then we have to be self-accountable, and we have to be self-reliable. And so trying to coerce yourself into doing things or shaming yourself along the way, it's not going to be successful for you. So again, this is just cultivating some awareness around forms of dysfunctional thinking. All right, then we look at labeling and mislabeling. Okay, labels. Again, things that happen in life are for an instant. And when you look at these instances that make up time, this is where we look at our entire life. So this is where we describe oneself, others, or events with negative labels. Okay, remember I told you the story, like, we don't speak negatively of women in my house. We don't really speak negatively of men either, but I don't like it when girls tear each other down. So it's a huge issue for me. So that is why I stated that. But I don't really like it when people talk about people, period, because there's always like that mirror approach. Wait a second. Why are you talking about that person? What are you saying about that person? Is there something that they're doing that I'm actually doing? Things to think about. So this is what we look at this from labeling and mislabeling. All right, I'm a failure. He's a cheater. There's always a deeper component. We as a society tend to treat symptoms and not look at the diagnosis itself. So if you're going to use, all right, the example on here is he's a cheater. Okay, there may be a lot more that goes into that. Maybe we've got family dynamics. Maybe we've got some abandonment traumas. There's a lot more that goes into this. And so when we start to label things in a negative capacity, a lot of times it's just because of a moment in time. Now, I'm not saying that there are not repeatable behaviors and patterns that people establish. It's going to be different. But we tend to label, judge, book by its cover, and mislabel. Then we get to know people and we're like, oh, well, that person's not that bad. or maybe they were abrupt in a meeting, and that's again an instance in time. So trying 20,000 foot view. Again, these are ideas around dysfunctional thinking and just ways to cultivate some awareness for yourself and what you're doing in your own life. And then lastly, for dysfunctional thinking, personalization. This is where we're identifying oneself, or we blame ourselves as the cause of negative events or outcomes that you could not be responsible for causing. I'm gonna give you a really heavy one today. I was fostered to adopt. Want to know how I personalize that? I blame myself. That's a heavy, heavy burden for a small child to carry. And so, done a lot of work. This is one of the reasons that I love sharing about all the stuff that I've learned throughout life, because there's a lot of stuff that I did that was not right. And a much better, happier person as a result of the work that I've done, which is why I share this with you. But there are a lot of times that we put a lot of blame on ourselves, especially when we go back to looking at childhood, adolescent periods, and whatnot. And so when we have influence over other people, this is where we can help people understand, like, hey, that wasn't your fault. We tend to demonize people or place blame on victims during certain situations as well. And this is something that we got to help one another with. Listening to people actively, helping identify, all right, stop blaming yourself. You had zero control over that. And this is so much easier said than done. But I'm just going to touch on it today, as it is a form of dysfunctional thinking. Be aware of it. Listen when you do it to yourself, because I guarantee there's something that you do that you blame yourself for that you had zero control over. Things to think about. All right, so why on earth does this matter? We just went through 11 ways of dysfunctional thinking. We looked at the roadblocks we throw up for ourselves. Why does it matter? If we don't know what affects us and how we impact our own selves, we are not able to understand how we, one, influence other people, two, lead them, or three, interact with other people. The best way to be aware is to know how you are showing up for yourself. And at the end of the day, that's the person you're spending the most time with. So what are you doing from a self-sabotage standpoint? What do you do to set yourself up for success? How well do you understand what you are doing in your own life, and how are you going to be able to take that and make something better out of it? Or are you just going to practice one of those roadblocks and ignore? Think that everybody's got options here. But all right, so we have now gone through this. We've looked at this. All right, Claire, I don't know how to start. All right, I'm aware I do some of these, but how do we start to move forward from here? And I love the dog with the head, because my dog does that when I talk to him. It's like, what are you talking about? So we're going to start by giving yourself some space, because we tend to overload right now, and we are constantly receiving information, receive. We're on our phones, we've got email, we've got calls, meetings are back to back to back to back, and our lives move very quickly. This is where I'm asking you to start carving out some space for yourself, because you need space to expand, to process, and to breathe and just be. So much more important now than I think ever that we've ever been aware of before. So this is one of your homework assignments, and I'll touch on it, and then we will make sure that you get a copy of this, because homework is important for your self-reflection. So I'm going to give you a ton of questions. I would like you to pick out some of these to think about. Take some time. You've got a month until we're going to see each other again. So I want you to understand where you're at. So we have done a lot of diving into information. Hopefully you have some self-awareness into some of the roadblocks you use now, and some of the dysfunctional thinking that you may see pop up. Again, just be aware and then take it for what it's worth. Cultivating that awareness is absolutely the first step. So how do you keep digging deeper to figure out what all this means for you? So I'm going to give you 20 questions. I want you to just pick a couple over the next couple of weeks and just spend about 5 minutes. And I want you to reflect and apply to what you're learning through this, but take the innate time and intentional time to think and write on this. So get to know yourself better. And I say that because if I asked you right now, what do you want? How would you answer me? Would you need a few minutes? Would you be able to say, this is exactly what I want? Give yourself the space to figure out who you are. All right. So what activities do you do for you? That might take you a moment to think about. When do you find yourself the happiest? What is the ideal day for you? What moments set your soul on fire? When is the last time that you really felt ignited and engaged in your own life? And what is your word? What is a word that you can come back to? That's your word that reflects on where you're at, where you want to go, what's driving you. Think about that. Then let's get deeper. Maybe pick a question from this set. What does success mean to you? We talked about defining success and failure last time, touched a little bit today. What does that mean for you? Because what I feel success is going to look very different than what Melly looks like at success, what Annalise looks like for success. What does that look like for you? What is a fear or professional challenge that keeps you up at night? I will tell you what mine is. I am terrified that we will not move the needle far enough for those coming after to be able to take the ball and run with it. I feel like we are continuously making excuses and reliving situations from 50 years ago, and I don't like that. We need to actually push that needle forward. And my biggest fear is that we won't get far enough during our lifetime. In the moments of self-doubt or adversity, how do you build yourself back up? Again, you can call it resilience, you can call it endurance. What does that look like for you? And how do you take that and build yourself back up from it? What mistake had you learned the most to lead you to success? Okay, great question to ask somebody over a coffee chat. Or what's the biggest sacrifice you've made in business? Was it a good one? Was it a bad one? What did you learn from it? And again, for bonus points, go have coffee with somebody and dig deeper into this. Next set, thinking back. What did you want to be when you were a child? If you're back in kindergarten, we're sitting at those round tables and your knees are up to your chin and we're grabbing a crayon. What did you want to be? What did that look like for you? Name someone, past or present, that you look up to today. Why do you look up to that person? Are there characteristics that that person has that you would like to emulate? How do you do that? List your traits, list your characteristics that you are most proud of within yourself. It's that great time when you're brushing your teeth in the morning and you're staring at yourself in the mirror. What are you proud of within yourself? Tell yourself that. Get it out. Give yourself a high five in the mirror. It sounds cheesy. It makes a huge difference. What is your personal or professional motto? I'm here to make good things happen for people. It's been my innate go-to phrase since I was tiny. What's yours? Knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently? What does that look like for you? Thinking back. All right, next set is your last set of questions. You can pick from these, do them all if you want bonus. Again, talk them out, have a dialogue with someone. And if you want to do a coffee chat with me, I'm here for it. All right, what is the first thing that you do every morning to start your day on the right foot? And if you've been coming to these, hopefully your alarm has been reprogrammed. But what do you do to start your day off on the right foot? What is your favorite thing about your workspace? I'm a huge plants person. Love seeing the greenery and plants grow and thrive. It's one of my favorite things. What's your favorite thing to come home to after a long day? Or if you're working from home, when you start that transition space? If you were magically given 3 more hours in a day, what would you do with them? And what tool, object, or ritual could you not live without in your day? Things to think about. Get to know yourself better. Dig into this. All right. Now, a couple of things, and I'm going to touch on this, and then I want to open it up for questions because we've kind of gotten pretty deep in this, and I have not asked you guys how you're hanging in with me. So there's a pretty big link to the mind and the body. And this is where we look at the physiological components. We'll talk about stress and boundaries and all of that stuff coming up. But I really want you guys to understand this. So we have gone into a lot of the mindset and the mind shift and identifying how well are we at shifting into a positive mindset? Where are our pitfalls? What are the roadblocks that we're throwing up for ourselves? Do we dysfunctionally think? And if so, what are those terms that are showing up in ourselves? Well, guess what? Your body emulates all of that, even though you might not think it does. And so there's a plethora of things that I would like to share with you guys, and we'll dive a little bit more into this in the next session. But what does your body tell you? And this is something that's important, especially if you're a leader or if you're engaging with another person, period, because there's so much information that you are going to be getting from that other person well beyond what you think. Let's dig into this for a second. All right, hopefully you are all still here with me. Your body language says you've lost interest. Kind of funny, but Very true. I think about that when I'm teaching students. So here's your blank slate. Hopefully you are back and you are alive and you are here with me. Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate it. Okay. So nonverbals. Who can give me some examples of some nonverbals? And if you would like to pull yourself off of mute, I would love to hear your voice. If you would prefer to chat, that's all right too. I know everyone's calling in from different areas. So give me some examples of nonverbal communication. Oh, thanks, Vicki. All right. Erin says eye contact. Eye contact is a huge one. What other nonverbal? Hi.
Muselman here. Facial expressions.
Yes. They can tell you quite a bit.
Mm.
All right. Arm folding. Deborah, huge one. Huge, huge, huge. Vicki says nodding. Desiree says body language. Absolutely. Very, very, very much so. And then what can you feel? Can you notice when this is going on within yourself? So let's go. Tamara, I know you took yourself off of mute. Talk to me about this for yourself.
Say it again.
What can you feel it when you are doing this in your own body? So let's say you may or may not be sitting in a meeting and someone says something that you're like, oh gosh, are you serious? Can you feel yourself when you start to do your own nonverbals?
I can, and oftentimes it's too late because my face tells on me, and so I haven't mastered my poker face yet, so I'm working on it.
Awesome. This is good because it's I think you bring up a really good point. Most of the time, by the time our brain catches up, it's too late and we've already done it. Right. There's a plethora of this that exists. Shirley says, I'm always told my facial expressions say it all. Yes. Deborah says, I can feel stress in my body. I'm going to cover this in two components. I'm going to touch on this week and we will bring it back here. There's a few things that come into nonverbals that we have not always talked about before. We have a plethora of them that I want to dig into. All of these things end up creating a dynamic that's going to surround us in our own energy. And we tend to share this a lot from a leadership standpoint. I'm going to ask you to look at it from a self standpoint. What do your nonverbals look like? When we look at when do you feel comfortable when you're standing around someone? So proxemics is one. Where do you like people in your intimate space, which is 0 to 18 inches, or are you more comfortable when we're at that 4 feet range? And what happens to you when people cross those boundaries? This is where we start to take some self-awareness into like a different component of, all right, here's the actual physiological that's happening to you when these things occur. And the superpower is to be aware of it so that you can hijack it, especially if you know you're going to have to be in situations that aren't going to be your favorite dynamic, but they're things to be aware of. And we do a lot of focus on everybody else, but I want you guys to look at it from your own stance of what does this look like when I'm talking? What does that look like? What tone? What cadence? If I am making eye contact, I'm with you guys on the eye roll. It's too late most of the time by the time I've eye rolled. And then, there's things that happen after that. But I want us to really dig into this a little bit more so that we are understanding of how we are showing up as ourselves and how you can feel it, or when you feel something coming on that you're like, oh, this isn't going to end well for me. It is also a superpower for leaders, especially those of you, or if you're not in a leadership role, but it is an influential thing to be aware of as well and can make a huge difference.